just so happens we have a question from one of Swarthmore's free market capitalists, a student named Soren.
Yes.
You're aware of him.
We've had email interchanges, Soren and I.
Okay, he sent in a very long question. I don't know what it means, but hopefully you will. So I'm just going to read it. Consumers can't consider all possible bundles of goods, prices, and time of consumption because the set of all bundle permutations is infinitely large. Considering all possible bundles is costly, so instead we might characterize the choosing of specific consumption by a utility maximization model under rational inattention to an infinite subset of the set of all permutations of consumption choices, which would leave rational consumers with only a finite set of choices to consider. That is, I claim, without putting forth much argument here, that satisficing only comes about when a utility maximization model is somehow misspecified. So please explain the difference between satisficing and utility maximization under rational inattention to a subset of possible consumption bundles.
All right, let me first try to translate that into English, or
I
at
would
least
appreciate
let me
that.
make sure. I don't know that I understand the question. I will tell you how I understand the question. Economists, there's a whole field in economics that talks about the economics of information, and so it acknowledges that there are really non-trivial search costs. And the argument is that a maximizer is not someone who chooses the best option. It's someone who chooses the best option given the search costs. So when you factor search costs in, you're going to limit your choice set because it's just way too costly to examine all the possibilities, even if it were possible. So here's the problem with that view. The problem with that view is that it doesn't really simplify the task for the decision maker, because instead of deciding how many, instead of looking at all the options and considering them, you have to somehow make a decision about how many options is the right number of options to limit yourself to. And so there's another incredibly complex calculation that the rational chooser makes in order to decide which set of complex calculations to make on the actual set of options. You know, how many restaurants should I think about eating in before I then put that number of restaurants in front of myself and decide which one finally to choose? So you now have two insoluble problems instead of one. That's my view. And I don't think that's remotely like satisficing, because the question that a satisficer is asking is, what is a good enough result for me? And that is itself not an easy one to answer. And then, having answered that question, you go out in the world and look until you find one candidate that gives you a good enough result. And that's it. You're not considering search costs, information, computational costs, or anything like that. You're not trying to maximize anything. What you are trying to do is get a good enough outcome. So I think that they're completely different aims and aspirations, and one does not collapse into the other. So if Soren, I have misunderstood your question, we may have to talk about this in my office.
Okay, we've got another question.
Did that answer, was that a comprehensible answer, by the way?
Yeah, I think so. I think Soren is trying to say that this makes sense under economic terms, and you're saying, what he's saying isn't necessarily psychologically realistic.
I don't think it's any more realistic psychologically than just assuming that we maximize it without attending to search costs.